Baptist podcast we gather around to talk theology, politics, and the sweet banjo sound. Kevin Thompson leads the way, teacher and preacher too. With a men's quartet, the harmonies ring true. Gather around the mic, let's find our way, singing praises, strumming banjo strings all day. Amputated Baptist podcast where we all belong. Join the harmony, let it carry us along. With a passion for faith and a banjo by our side, we don't deep, we don't hide, we take it all in stride. From parables to politics, every topic on the table, let's harmonize together, let's make it stable. In the chord progressions we find our peace, singing praises, strumming banjo strings all day. Amputated Baptist podcast where we all belong. Join the harmony, let it carry us along.
Theology, politics, and a little bit of banjo. You're listening to the Amputated Baptist podcast. And now, here is your host, the Amputated Baptist himself, Kevin Thompson.
Well, hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a special guest, Ben Zeisloft. Ben, you are the editor at the Sentinel, a Christian news organization. You're a journalist. You've written with, you've contributed to the Daily Wire, the Spectator. You're also a member at 10th Presbyterian there in Philadelphia, and author of a new book, Forsakers of the Fatherless. So, Ben, welcome to our podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, first question I've got to ask, and I didn't prepare you for this, but I'm wondering how a Presbyterian got mixed up with the Founders ministry.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So personally, I'm sort of in between the Baptist and Presbyterian right now.
Okay.
I grew up Baptist. I've been going to the PCA church for the past 6 or 7 years. So I really need to sort through that issue. We don't have children yet, so that'll really force me to do that if and when the Lord gives us that opportunity. But so I'm sort of in between, but I'm good friends with, Askell and Founders, and they have a great team over there.
Well, they have an excellent team there, and we highly recommend their ministry within the Southern Baptist Convention. And yes, you need to just full-fledged jump over, become Baptist, repent of your Presbyterian way. No, but we're glad to have you on the podcast. And first, tell me a little bit about the Sentinel. Now, I'm excited about this. I'm just looking at this for the first time. I'm a Christian school teacher. In fact, I'll be teaching a current events class this upcoming year. And so I suspect this is a website I'll be visiting frequently.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the Sentinel is a conservative news and commentary outlet owned and operated by Christians. So it's important for Christians to be involved in the world of journalism because, we serve the God who is truth. We know that every idle word will be held for account on the last day. And secular journalists don't approach their work like that. And even a lot of Christian journalists, they don't assume that Christianity is, all of Christ for all of life. They maybe emphasize Christianity on certain moral points or social issues, but they don't see the Christian worldview as totalizing and applying to all of life, whether it's economics, healthcare, immigration policy, all the things that we're facing as a nation. So the Sentinel really exists to try to emulate that and make sure that really solid, reformed Christian people are doing some good journalism and just addressing the issues of our day.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because, as you said, if we really do have a Christian worldview, we don't believe in a division between secular and sacred, and somewhere in the middle is objective ground. There is no objectivity outside of scriptural truth. All truth is God's truth. And therefore, when you leave God out of it, you are making a statement right there and then that says God has nothing to do with this. And for some reason, there's a corner of the earth that God doesn't control, that God's truth doesn't apply to. And that's heresy.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about your new book, upcoming book. I believe that's going to be released in August, is Forsakers of the Fatherless. And let's back up a little bit because I'll tell a little bit of my personal story. Back in 1973, the Supreme Court handed down their famous Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion in all 50 states of the U.S. And just a short time after that, my mother got pregnant. And she had lots of health issues, lots of different complications that would arise because of that pregnancy. So much, in fact, that the doctors urged her to have an abortion. Said we can't guarantee this child will survive. We can't guarantee that you're going to survive. Yet, my mother was a Christian. She was dedicated to the word and said, no, this child, I'm going to have this child. Of course, I'm thankful she did that because I'm here today. And so I've always
Amen.
been pro-life. I've been very adamant about that. But in the past few years, my thoughts on that have begun to evolve. And when I say evolve, I'm not going pro-choice, but moving more toward what I've been introduced, the idea of abortion, uh, uh, abolitionism. And
Yes.
the pro-life movement for years has always accepted some sort of exception, whether it's the life of the mother, whether it's rape or incest, or we don't want to seem too out there or too extreme on this issue. We want to be reasonable. But as I've been studying this and praying about this, I'm wondering what that word reasonable means. As one person said, the definition of an immoral law ends with, and then you can kill the baby. And so, Ben, you're an abolitionist when it comes to abortion. So you're not just pro-life. You are pro-life, but not as some would define that. How did you arrive at your position?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start by defining abolition. So by the abolition of abortion, we would say, we should oppose child sacrifice, which is abortion,
Yeah.
and seek to end it immediately and totally and without exception or compromise. So we'll get into more of what that means, I'm sure, throughout this conversation. But the way I arrived to it is like you. I grew up as an evangelical, went to an evangelical church. My parents were believers. So growing up, I always knew that I was pro-life, that I opposed abortion. I
Right.
knew abortion was wrong. I knew that it was killing a baby, all those sorts of things. My church growing up had, Sanctity of Life Sundays. We had the baby bottle
Yep.
campaign where we donate to
Yep.
the local pregnancy centers, things like that. So that was not an issue for me. I never had to come to the point that, realizing that, murdering babies is wrong. I always kind of knew that.
Right.
But if we, like you, a few years ago, really started to understand that a lot of these pro-life groups are not out there to actually do that. They're not actually out there to end abortion. They're there to, like you said, be reasonable, have, this politically pragmatic attitude toward the murder of babies in our nation. And, the abolitionist movement had already been around by that time and had many examples of these groups that were, opposing abolition bills in the States, which was shocking to me. At first, I didn't believe it. Like a lot of folks, had to really see the evidence. And it's not just a strange one-off case of one specific really bad pro-life group. It's many of them across the country, which is really devastating. But really, so I have to credit the guys at what was Free the States is now Abolitionists Rising for exposing me to these issues. So I was friends with some of those guys and met them in person in Nashville 4 years ago, and I was interning at the Daily Wire. And they really challenged me to look at the Bible and see what the Bible says about actually opposing a public evil like abortion. And we're not told that we can regulate it to death. We're not told that we can choose who lives and dies based on whether or not they have a heartbeat or how far along they are, whether they were conceived, like you said, in rape or incest. We are told to establish justice for the fatherless, to rescue those being taken away to death, hold back those stumbling to the slaughter. The sixth commandment is you shall not murder. That's applied in case law in Exodus to babies in the womb. So it's very clear what God actually expects of us in terms of the murder of babies in the womb, which is not to compromise with it, it's to abolish it.
Yeah. So there's no compromise here. 100% against abortion, no exceptions. And so walk us through that, because that right there is a very controversial statement. Again, for a guy like me, I'm not quite at the abolitionist viewpoint, but I'm headed there. And I think maybe after this conversation, I'll be there. Because I'm still a little bit hesitant. Like, let's talk about the pragmatist side
Sure.
of this, because I think that's probably the number one thing people would say. We just can't do it. We just can't get there. There's not enough support. And so, politically speaking, it's a non-starter. So why do this if we don't have the support to get there?
Right, absolutely. So I think there are explicit passages in God's word that do forbid us from making those sorts of laws. So Isaiah chapter 10, for example, says, woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees and the writers keep writing oppression. And I believe it also says to delay justice to the fatherless in that passage too. But basically, we're not supposed to be writing laws that pick and choose who actually receives justice. That's what God defines as an iniquitous decree. It is iniquitous. It's unrighteous. It's out of line with God's moral character to say that certain lives are valuable, but then others aren't for some arbitrary characteristic. Same with Psalm 94. So that's an exhortation to civil magistrates that says, can wicked rulers be allied with you, those who frame injustice by statute? And so it's kind of implying that, actually really directly saying that God is opposed to those efforts and even those lawmakers who are writing iniquitous statutes into law. So if you look objectively at heartbeat bills, at certain, we call them deadline bills at the Foundation to Abolish Abortion, where I should mention that I work full time at Foundation to Abolish Abortion. We call them deadline bills because, right, they cut off a certain period of gestation, maybe 15 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 20 weeks, and say, you can kill babies before this point, but not after. All these are sort of arbitrary, iniquitous decrees that God, has not commanded, has not commended in his word. It's out of line with his character. So I'd say there's an explicit biblical case to make against them. And even practically, I think, it starts from a good place of, I'm looking at a state like California or Colorado or New York and saying, well, I want to get done what I can possibly get done. Maybe that's not going to be the complete abolition or even like something like a heartbeat bill, but maybe there's some kind of chipping away at abortion I can do. I would say that, that starts from a good place, but I would say if you look at the past 50 years of our history in trying to end abortion in America, it hasn't worked. So we now have more abortions post Dobbs than we did under the last years of Roe, even though in theory states can end abortion. And it's because a lot of these red states are still in the mindset of, let's regulate abortion. Let's close the clinics, but let's not actually establish equal protection so that anyone who murders a baby can be penalized for it as murder. So we're seeing, when this pragmatic attitude continues, it actually allows for this practice to be deeper and deeper entrenched into our culture. And now we're at the point where our culture is so deeply pro-abortion that we have groups like Shout Your Abortion that's actively celebrating it. That wasn't around, 20 or 30 years ago. So we've failed to be salt and light and say clearly and boldly abortion is murder, it needs to be abolished. And I think we're reaping the fruit of that today.
Yeah, just the other day on Twitter or X, whatever. I'm old. It's always going to be Twitter. But you had this picture of an actress, Cynthia Nixon, with her red cap, make abortions great again. And I think, it does seem like since Dobbs, the abortion, or even since I can remember, it seems like now abortion advocates are louder than ever before. So the piecemeal doesn't seem to be working quite as we expected. But let me throw this argument out, because this is where I struggle. And so maybe you can help me out. So I'm sure this is not something that'll be new to you. So, all right, we've got two abortion bills. We've got one that's absolute, no abortion, outlawed with no exceptions. And then one that does allow for some exceptions. So Bill A doesn't have the support. Bill B, it's going to be tough, but maybe we can push it through. If we go for Bill A, okay, it's not going to pass. We push for Bill B, maybe it passes, but it'll save some children, not all that we want. But wouldn't that be better to save some children than to push A that wouldn't save any because it wouldn't pass?
Right. So again, that comes from a good place of wanting to save as many babies as possible. That's not a bad instinct to have. But I would say that obedience to God, does supersede that even really good instinct. So, God has not commanded us to have rape and incest exceptions in our laws. We'd all recognize as absurd and evil if we can murder born people who are conceived in rape and incest. I know some of those people, and I don't think they should be legally murdered. So why aren't we applying the same standard inside the womb? Again, even if you agree with that, you may be tempted to say, well, we want to save as many babies as possible. But really, I would say just pragmatically on the ground, if you have the votes to pass a bill with exceptions, you probably also have it to pass it without exceptions as well. So a lot of these states, they claim that they can't abolish abortion. It's too controversial. Meanwhile, it's Kentucky, Alabama, states with deep red legislatures, super majorities, Republican governors in some cases. And there's no chance that, there's going to be a political backlash, as some of these groups and politicians are saying, if you try to actually abolish abortion. It's just not going to happen to the extent that, a state like Kentucky loses, their super majority in the legislature because they try to do that. Really, it like you said, it's being politically having political cowardice, not really wanting to do the right thing for politically expedient reasons. So I'd say, people bring up those sorts of scenarios a lot, and I would say I haven't seen too many situations where that's actually been the case, where a state that could abolish abortion, is wrestling between these two options. Really, that second option with exceptions for rape and incest, or maybe in some states it takes the form of a heartbeat bill, that exists so that states can say they've done something without actually doing the thing they're supposed to be doing. So I would say that's sort of the dynamic on the ground.
Okay, so in your book, you go through several states where this has been tried. And the shocking thing is the reaction of the pro-life movement to these bills that would outlaw abortion completely. Because it's not, I think the scenario I set up just a minute ago may not even be completely accurate. Because I would assume, okay, we all want to end abortion, period. But okay, we can't get there now, so we'll do this. But in places where we've had the opportunity, it's been the pro-life movement, not just the pro-choice groups, but the pro-life movement has stood up and said, no, we can't do this. That's very shocking. So elaborate on that for us, because I think it's the crux of your book, and it's the most shocking thing that jars me.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, so the book details, like you said, several examples of pro-life groups that say they want to end abortion, opposing bills to end abortion. And even if not, like we were just discussing, even if they're not sold out on the immediatism versus incrementalism discussion, you'd at least say, all right, let them give it a shot. We're not going to stand in their way, even if we don't think that's the best thing to do. But no, these groups are actively opposing efforts to abolish abortion. So that's the shocking element. And, just your comments about, these having the shot to do it, and maybe even having the votes in Louisiana, which is one of the chapters in my book.
Right.
There were a bunch of Southern Baptists who were behind a bill to abolish abortion, just apply the exact same murder, assault, wrongful death laws that protect born people to protect preborn people as well. They had the votes a few days before that bill was going to go to the Louisiana House floor for a vote. And that morning, 70 plus pro-life groups wrote a letter, and they published it nationwide. They sent it to all these lawmakers in Louisiana who are going to have a chance a few hours later to vote for this bill, basically saying that we oppose this legislation because it would criminalize abortion for women. And that was the basis on which they said you can't end abortion, to which we would just say, it's not a bill to criminalize women. It's a bill to criminalize abortion. And anybody, whether they're male, female, the abortionist himself, anybody who willfully takes the life of a preborn baby, we're just saying that person is treated like they had just murdered a born person because, of course, inside versus outside the womb, same value. So that's the shocking reality is, a lot of these groups, they profess that they want to end abortion, but they want to either keep abortion legal for women, or they oppose it for some other politically pragmatic reason.
I think the one thing that we would all say we agree with is that life begins at conception. And of course, so, and just to back up, I'm not in this episode, we're not appealing to pro-choice arguments, because if you're listening to this podcast, you're going to be pro-life. And so this is, it's a somewhat internal debate. So we would agree for the most part that life begins at conception. And if we do that, to me, the conclusion I'm coming to is there's only one consistent viewpoint then. If life is life, and you extinguish, you murder that life, there ought to be consequences, whether it's the doctor, whether it's the mother who consented to that. If this is a real human life made in the image of God, then why wouldn't there be consequences for doing that? Back in 2016, Donald Trump got into a lot of trouble because he was asked by, I think it was Chris Matthews, do you believe women should be punished for having abortions? And he said yes. And that was shocking to everybody. And I have to admit, sometimes, we try like as someone who's been invested in the pro-life movement for several years, we want to portray women as women who've had abortions as victims themselves. Yet at the end of the day, they made a decision to kill a child, to kill a human being. And that has to have consequences.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Of course, they're victims of abortion. So, we minister here in Philadelphia outside of one of the main Planned Parenthoods in the city. And I've seen victims of abortion. Absolutely. I've seen, the women in one particular case a few years ago, there was a woman who was basically dragged out of the back of a white van, and she was clearly not in her right mind. It was sort of whisked into the abortion mill by the male who was with her, didn't really seem to be her husband or boyfriend or anything like that. So that's definitely the case. I don't think anybody's advocating for targeting women like that or anything like that. But there's also the women that I've met outside of abortion mills who are on their 8th abortion and are saying, yeah, I know it's murder. I know it's just my right to do it. And I want to get back to having lots of, intercourse with and living that kind of a lifestyle. So I think in the former case, nobody's saying go after that woman, go after the people who are forcing her into an abortion. But in the latter, if somebody is clearly willfully murdering people, and in this case, their own babies in their own wombs, then of course they should face penalties for it. I don't, like you said, I don't see any other consistent way to do that. And Trump was not a pro-lifer at the time. I don't think he really still is, but he clearly was trying to feel out the issue, and I don't think he'd really thought through the question of criminal penalties for women. So he just sort of said, yeah, there has to be some kind of penalty, right? Just thinking logically, like if we're saying abortion is murder, then yes, of course, murderers get penalized. But clearly, and then the pro-life groups just descended on him after that, saying that was uncompassionate, and he quickly changed his mind on it. But again, that's deeply inconsistent.
So how do you distinguish then, from a legal standpoint, the woman who is forced into an abortion, the one thrown into a white van or whatever, and one who just says, yeah, I'm on my 8th abortion. This is my birth control.
Right, absolutely. So just like any other murder case, there's probable cause to even start the investigation. So, there has to be some kind of evidence that arises that a murder took place. And then from there, the decision is made as to whether or not that should be investigated. And then there could be an indictment. And then, of course, there's a whole legal system to make sure that, due process is respected, that the rights are respected, they're innocent until proven guilty. So there's a lot of steps that have to happen before somebody is penalized for murder. And that's good. That's to make sure that we're not just throwing people in jail on accusations. That's a good biblical system to have in place. So nobody's advocating for on the mere accusation that somebody had an abortion or the fact that they went through with it, and it automatically means they willfully murdered the baby. That has to be established in a court of law with all their rights upheld in order to actually bring a penalty in that case. So again, a judge, a jury, prosecutors, defenders can determine whether or not somebody was a victim of an act or a perpetrator of an act.
So due process.
Exactly. Yes.
So we're not, as some would portray, you're not sending some sort of abortion Gestapo group monitoring local hospitals or whatever, patrolling the cities, but we're looking at, you've got to have some probable cause, you've got to have maybe a warrant or whatever, an actual due process where there is a defense mechanism as well. We're not just locking up people based on my whim.
Exactly. Yes.
All right. So in that same vein, one of the other arguments is, okay, well, what about the life of the mother? Because there's a great concern about women who have miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies, whatever, and there's really no difference between that and an abortion. So you could have women, if we go complete abolitionist, there could be women in jeopardy because they had a miscarriage. How do you respond to that criticism?
Right, absolutely. And so, it's a complicated issue, but so we actually have a really helpful article about it on Foundation to Abolish Abortion's website. That details we do have life of the mother language in our bills. And all that's basically saying is, there are cases of medical triage where maybe like an ectopic pregnancy, where a doctor is presented with two valuable lives, infinitely valuable, man in God's image, and maybe he can't save both. It's not wrong to take life-saving measures to save the mother if that unintentionally causes the death of the baby. So that is very different from saying, oh, I have like your mother did, some kind of threat to my physical health. Therefore, I'm going to solicit an abortion and have my baby chopped up in my womb. Those are two very different things. We had a family member who passed away last year, who had cancer and did an early delivery of that baby. So I believe it was at 30 weeks that he was delivered at. So that's the recognition of, both these lives are valuable. We're going to try to balance, giving this baby the best shot at life while also making sure that the woman can get on chemo as quickly as possible. And that's not an easy decision to make. And so our bills don't really try to crack down on when that happens, but it just makes sure that reasonable steps are taken to save both lives and treat both of them like human beings.
Yeah, that's and that seems reasonable. Again, whatever that word means at this point. The book we're talking about again is Forsakers of the Fatherless: The Secret Treachery of the Pro-Life Establishment. I want you to go out and buy this book. You can pre-order it at the Founders Ministries. I believe also on Amazon. We want you to get a copy of that. Thankfully, Ben, you provided me with what I call my media mogul copy, and I was able to read through this. And I really want to encourage you to get this if you're struggling with this issue. I think you're going to find some shocking statements, shocking realities and truths that, Ben, you do a great job of reporting to us. And even just the foreword by Dusty Devers is worth the price of the book in and of itself. Not to discount anything that you've written, but it's really
Yeah.
It's really worth your time to read. If you're pro-life, I want you to read this book. Ben, tell us, just give us one final thought. For those who are in my position, you've been pro-life for a long time. What is it that we should be thinking about to push us over to a more consistent viewpoint for the protection of human life made in the image of God?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would just say, everybody who is pro-life or calls themselves pro-life would acknowledge, like you said earlier, that life starts at conception. So really what the abolitionist movement is trying to do is let's make sure we're acting consistently with that call. If we're saying that life starts at conception, we should treat lives who are conceived already but not yet born the same as all other human life because they're equally valuable. So that's really the thrust of the abolition movement, is making sure that's being done in a way that God prescribes. And I'll add as well, this book is not written as just, this apologetic for the abolitionist movement.
Right.
So Dusty, like you said, Senator Devers gets into that in his foreword, but the book itself is written to just any American Christian who wants to end abortion. It's not necessarily pigeonholed into the abolitionists.
Yeah.
So it's seeking to present evidence, real data to show that this is an actual concern, that there's pro-life groups opposing the end of abortion.
Right.
And then folks can make their judgments from there. So, but I think it's compelling to biblically minded and thinking people to agree with a lot of what we've been saying. And say that, yeah, maybe there's some ways that we can reform the way we've been addressing abortion for the past half century in this nation.
And so what would you recommend to people who are abolitionists, but they're not currently in a state that has a bill that would prevent all abortion, that would outlaw all abortion?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can reach out to us at Foundation to Abolish Abortion to see. So our website is faa.life. To see if there is a bill in the works. Maybe there have been bills in past years, but not this year, and we need to restart those efforts. But really, we're blessed in this nation to be citizens who can go and talk to our elected representatives. So go and email your state lawmakers, your state rep, your state senator, and see if they're interested, and just sit down and have a conversation with them. Right. I've been doing some of that in Pennsylvania where I live, and I'm shocked at how easy it is to actually get a hold of these people and to have appointments with them. Even people who are not my representative, I've driven in some cases, just an hour or two away to another district to talk to a rep in their office. But that's part of our duty as Christians. If you look at the Bible, whether it's the prophets or John the Baptist or folks like that who are exhorting the civil magistrates to do what's right before God, we have that same sacred duty and responsibility today as citizens in this nation. So really, anybody can do this work. It's not rocket science. It's just being a Christian and loving our neighbors as ourselves.
And that's really that's really important. And as someone who encourages political involvement, it's not as difficult as you think. And in fact, in some states, when I grew up in Massachusetts, I wish every state had this, but in Massachusetts, you have the idea of the citizen legislator. You can actually, as a citizen, propose a bill, and your state representative would have to put that in. And so options like that are available in certain states, but you got to be informed, and you have to do a little bit of research. And I'm sure groups like Foundation to Abolish Abortion can help you with that. And so, but it involves someone who cares, someone who has a passion, and someone who wants to do something. They say history is made by people who show up. So it's time to show up. And if we really do believe in the ministry to the fatherless, the orphan care, if we want to stand up for the sanctity of human life, all human life, it's incumbent upon us to do something. So Ben, thank you for your ministry, and thank you for this book, and for taking the time to chat with us here.
Amen. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And we're going to have in the show notes, we'll have a link where you can order the book, and also to Foundation to Abolish Abortion, the Sentinel as well. And so make sure you check that out, amputatedbaptist.com. Join our Facebook group, get involved. We're on all the socials. And you got to check out Ben's X account, because he's very active there, and also gives a great amount of helpful information. So follow Ben on X as well. So until next week, have a great rest of your week.
Singing praises, strumming banjo strings all day. Amputated Baptist Podcast, where we all belong. Join the harmony, let it carry us along.